by Representative Wilburn, Representative Holt indicated that this is not an economic development bill. Well, I disagree. It is an economic development bill, just not the kind we would like. I'd like to share with you a communication I received, one of many I received on this topic. I was born and raised in Iowa, and I have lived here my whole life. I remember a time when Iowa was leading the nation in civil rights as among the first to legalize same-sex marriage, desegregation of schools prior to Brown v. Education. Today, we are still a leader. If HSB 242 passes, we will be the first in the nation to remove civil rights from citizens. I am not proud to call myself an Iowan right now. I am a young professional. I attended Drake University, where I studied advertising, graphic design, and music. I work in marketing in downtown Des Moines, and I am part of several community ensembles enriching Iowa's vibrant culture. I am also trans. This bill would make it unsafe for me to live in Iowa, so I would take my education, my music, and my family out of state. I don't want to be a part of Iowa's brain drain, but I haven't been given much of a choice in the matter. In addition to the negative economic impact this legislation has on our state, I want to also consider the massive cost to taxpayers in litigation from this bill. Please remember and take your guidance from our flag. Our liberties we prize, and our rights we will maintain. I have a personal connection to the sentiments expressed by this writer. When my daughter, a year or two ago, told me that she was expecting her first child and would need to move from her 4-story walk-up in New York City, I suggested she consider Davenport, Iowa, where the babysitting is free and the housing prices are much more affordable. And she had one sentence answer for me: and what if my child is gay? I had no response for that. This bill is simply not right. And I ask you all to consider that. How does it feel that we might expose some of our citizens to discrimination in housing, employment, credit, education, because we don't like the idea of them using the same bathroom? I think the unintended consequences of this far outweigh. I'm sorry, I don't see the benefits of the bathroom issue, but okay, let's assume there are some. How does it outweigh this? I beg you, find in your hearts the compassion to treat all people equally and decently. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Representative Shipley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, and the public. This is a very important issue. I think the bill is very straightforward. So thanks for House Study Bill 242. I have a lot of questions on the status quo and how we arrived at present law. So I was hoping someone might be willing to answer some questions on the status quo. And I thought, being the author or the floor manager of legislation, would Representative Wessel-Purcell yield to a few questions?
Will the lady yield?
I'll do the best that I can.
You're in order.
Thank you very much. So we've heard a lot of things so far. Representative Wilburn said we all have a gender identity, implying that the protections in Iowa Code 216 for gender identity could theoretically apply to everyone. Representative Myers said that gender identity should be in 216. Could you help walk the committee through on how you guys decided that gender identity should be in Iowa Code 216?
So we looked at what some other states did, and there were states that were adding it at the time. They had not done it in their original civil rights code. And the LGBTQ plus community was strongly supporting continuing to keep gender identity in there, which is why we decided to stay.
At that point, were you aware of any ongoing discrimination against gender identity, or what kind of issues brought it forward that it was something to be addressed?
Certainly, there were reports all over the place. I mean, the most prominent one that I remember was in certainly in Florida, where there was a man who had been a city manager for a Florida city for 14 years. He decided to transition, and as soon as he tried to transition, he was fired. There are stories like that all over the place. Not everybody is willing to come out and tell their story. But yes, there are lots and lots of stories about people who lose their jobs, lose their housing, are not afforded an education, do not get credit because of their gender identity. That's not anything new.
Was the question of Medicaid coverage or coverage of third-party insurance, was that brought up in 2007 at that time?
I don't remember discussing that very much. I know we've had a lot of discussions on it since then.
Okay, so you agree it is an important issue now. The legislator's been very interested in, but at the time of 2007, it was not necessarily brought before the larger body.
I can't say that it was not the discussion was very simple when we did it. It just passed.
Did
I
you,
don't know how to tell you that.
when working on the bill, did you guys ever discuss the question of immutability as it relates to civil rights?
You're going to have to restate that question.
The concept of immutability, the idea that a protected characteristic would be unchanging over the life of a person and objectively verified, such as someone's age or national origin or their race.
Or their religion.
Well, we can get to that, but so did you guys?
Yeah, we discussed that, but we recognized in the bill that that the Civil Rights Code also included religion, and so it's not immutable, right?
So just
correct? Am I correct?
Well, so just to be clear, it is in your view that gender identity is not immutable.
I believe that there are people who have gender identity, and that it is there is founded information in medical journals. I'm not a medical scientist, but we did a lot of research on that back then, and that in the best interest of people who struggled with this identity, the best interest of those people was that they should have equal civil rights to all of us.
Regardless of whether or not that gender identity changes over time. Is that fair to say?
Clearly it was changing.
So gender identity does change. So someone who has a particular gender identity today, at a different point in time, their gender identity may be different.
So if you, I don't know if you've taken the time to talk to people who have gender identity issues, but one of my favorite documentaries right now is the documentary of Will and Harper. And I strongly recommend that you watch it, because certainly there was somebody who was born a man and his gender identity did change, and she transitioned to a woman. So I guess, yes, they changed. Okay. I don't really understand the questions, I guess. You want me to ask if they changed back? No. She is very happy and wish she had changed earlier.
Are you aware of people who do desist or detransition after receiving? You were not? Okay. The definition of gender identity in Iowa Code 216 that you wrote, gender identity means a gender-related identity of a person, regardless of the person's assigned sex at birth. Can you walk us through what that means?
That some people change their identity from what they were born in.
So a gender-related identity is just a little bit awkward because the definition contains the word it's defining. So what does gender identity mean? I know according to Representative Wilburn, we all have it. What is gender identity and what is it?
It's how you identify.
Okay.
It's how you believe yourself to be. And, once again, if you have taken the opportunity to meet and talk to individuals who have a gender identity, who disagree with the gender for which they were born, you learn a lot. And again, Will and Harper is a wonderful place to start to learn.
So I think we've heard reports of like school children who might want to wear a tail at school or use a litter box or something. When gender identity includes someone who
I think those are a lot of tall tales that you've been hearing for a long time. And 99.9% of what you are talking about is just simply true, and talk that is harming and distracting from the issue at hand.
Okay, so I apologize for that. Last question, if you don't mind. So my understanding of the current construction of code is that any male who claims gender identity would therefore have access to any female private space at any time. Is that your understanding?
There are very specific things that people go through, and it's a very difficult transition and a very difficult experience to have. And not any male is going to go out there and say, I want to be a female, because clearly that is not what happens. Clearly, that is not what happens, and it is insulting to the community for you to say that that is what happens.
Thank you, Representative Wessel Chriselle. So in closing, what I'm very interested in is the definition. I think there are problems with the definition in law. And I think the first thing, or if the bill weren't to pass, I'd like to hear from those who are defending the status quo. What is the criteria that someone would use to establish themselves as a member of the protected class and therefore entitled to these protections? Because right now it seems very amorphous, subject to change, and yet also applying to everyone all at once. So that's what I was hoping to illustrate for the benefit of the committee, and I'll turn it back to the chair, but I appreciate everyone indulging in that.
Chair recognizes Representative Srinivas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When I ran for office because I wanted to stick up for my community, because I wanted to make sure that every single person got access to fair treatment, to the dignity of the life that they deserve. I never thought I would be sitting in a committee as an elected legislator talking about taking away rights of Iowans. We have so many problems before us. People can't afford health care. Our education system, which was once number one, is no longer there. And we're sitting here talking about deciding whether certain Iowans deserve to have the right to even apply to an apartment building in my town. We're talking about treating certain people as subhuman merely because of who they are. That's not the oath that I took when I swore to be a part of this office, when I swore to uphold the rights of all Iowans, the freedoms of all Iowans. This bill infringes on those. There's so many definitions in here that actually even make it more difficult for the average Iowan. The average Iowan to get the healthcare they need. When we start messing with words such as gender and redefining sex, words that are established already within our code for medical as well as health insurance ethics, for reimbursements, we start to create a quagmire effect that's going to create even more holes and issues for people to get access to care they need and get that covered, making it more unaffordable yet again for the average Iowan just to exist. Because that's apparently what we want to do in this bill today. When we talk about some of the issues that some of my prior colleagues spoke about, when we're talking about the holes that we have in our community, the economy that we're facing right now, we're talking about having a massive workforce shortage. In the last year, there was a study that showed that 46% of all moves related to Iowa were moving out of Iowa. So almost half of people were moving out of Iowa. We're barely maintaining the status quo when we need to be attracting people to our state. But more than that, let's talk about who's moving out of Iowa. A large portion of that was the age between 35 and 44. People who are vital to our workforce. A large portion of that, in fact, the majority, are high earners, above $150,000 per year. People who fill specific, skilled jobs. The jobs that we are having troubles filling right now in the state of Iowa. And what were the reasons they were leaving? The top reasons had to do with the fact that they couldn't live the life that they wanted to lead here. Much of which has to do with the fact that we're passing bills like this to take away rights away from Iowans. I'm here to empower every single person in my community, and this bill does the exact opposite of that. How anybody can go back to their community, look somebody in their eyes and said that they stood here to become part of the very first state to actively deprive people of rights, that's a disgrace to being an elected official. So I have.
Representative Srinivas, you hit your mic. Thank you. Chair recognizes Representative James.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Chamber of Commerce offers a staggering data point that we are the only state in the country that hasn't doubled its population in the last 100 years. We're the only state in the country that hasn't doubled in population in the last 100 years. The Atlas Migration Project pointed out in 2024 that we are in the top 10 states for population drain. People leaving the state of Iowa, and we're number 7 when it comes to young people leaving the state of Iowa. When we introduce bills like this, we send an unwelcoming message to folks across the country in a time where we are draining population, we are working against our own selves when we put forward bills that politicize children, that focus on punch down culture war politics. The result sends a message loud and clear to the people of Iowa that you are not welcome. Now, I sat through the subcommittee today alongside a number of you in this room, and I heard from folks with differing opinions on this particular bill, many of them religious. And because of that, I can't help but to say that I am a person of faith. Many of you know that I'm an ordained Presbyterian pastor. Part of my training is 3 years of theological seminary where I learned Greek and Hebrew, no Latin representative, but maybe for another day. And we talk a lot about the Christian scriptures. And one of the most profound moments in my seminary was when a theologian came to speak to us and held up a Bible, which is real big and real thick. We can all picture it. And then he said, when he was in seminary, he engaged in a practice where he read through the entire Bible, cover to cover, word for word. And he actually took a pair of scissors and he removed all of the references to the poor, the pushed aside, the least, the lost, the lonely, people who were living on the margins of society, folks who were vulnerable. He removed all of those scriptures. And then you know what he did? He held up the Bible. And the difference, when you removed all of the scriptures that talked about the least, the lost, the lonely, those who are vulnerable, the Bible was very thin. And he made the argument that the heart of the Christian scriptures is that Jesus is to welcome the least, the lost, the lonely, the poor, the pushed aside, those who are on the margins of society. And in this very moment, I can't help but talk about my personal faith commitments and to talk about the Jesus who I know from those scriptures who would fight for those who were on the margins to have a voice and to have a home and to belong, to be welcomed, to belong. When you love transgender Iowans, when you love folks in the LGBTQ community, these kinds of bills make you sick to your stomach. Because this bill is legalizing discrimination for vulnerable folks. This bill is legalizing hatred. This bill is legalizing hate to our very own Iowans. Christian scriptures are clear. We do not get to pick and choose who our neighbors are, but we are commanded to love them. This bill is anything but loving. The people of Iowa has asked us to come to this state capitol to figure out affordable housing, affordable childcare, education that will give our kids their best chance at life, healthcare, the cost of healthcare, the fact that our parents are aging and they need places that are safe and secure for them to live out their best years. These are the kinds of things that the legislature is supposed to be working on. Instead, we have culture war, political punch down bills that just continue to divide folks instead of bringing Iowans together around the real issues that our state is facing. I will be a hard no on this bill today and hope that you consider joining me. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Representative Wilburn for a second time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, again, I think it's important to think back to why we have the Civil Rights Code. Is to ensure that we all can enjoy the civil rights that derive from the Constitution, Bill of Rights, other documents, which are not perfect, and as pointed out, in the Constitution in order to form a more perfect union, we establish justice. Civil rights are about establishing justice. The protected classes, which we all have, ensure that if someone is going to be denied renting an apartment based on who they are and not get a credit card based on who they are, if like my son is going to face discrimination in the workplace, who didn't come forward to make a formal complaint, which a lot of them do not, it's important that we step back and remember these are our friends, they're our neighbors, they're our family members. And the concerns that were brought up by some in terms of bathroom, the schools have been managing their way through that. There are other ways to try and address that, because young people in particular will stick because the issues related to children. Young people have a whole slew of things that they're trying to sort through to become adults. But when you take a blank effort at striking and removing a people from our state law, from our state code, then none of us are really safe. Representative Holt mentioned that no other class, no other attempt with the civil rights. Well, there have been members on Judiciary Committee in this legislature since I've been here who've talked about removing the Civil Rights Code. At the very hearing today, someone came up and said that for her, lesbian, LGBTQ, lesbian, gay should be next. That's their next agenda. So don't open this door. Leave the Civil Rights Code intact. Let's get focusing back on the judiciary issues that are strongly affecting, impacting Iowans' ability to get representation in court, that our correction system isn't overloaded, and on and on and on. So I ask you to be a no. This is not something that needs to happen today. It sends the wrong message. I ask you and any Republican legislators who might be listening into this to please do not allow this to come to the floor, House floor, if this passes. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Representative Holt for closing remarks on House Study Bill 242 as amended.
Thank you. Well, it's no surprise to me that Democrats on this committee want to talk about everything what's in the actual bill. They want to talk about cost of living, which of course we all know was caused by Joe Biden's policies. They want to talk about everything except what is in this bill, because the reality is that liberal Democrats have bought into an ideology that erases women. Liberal Democrats who once championed women's rights, who helped forge women's sports and Title IX and all of these issues, are now perfectly okay with erasing women. The discrimination is happening now, ladies and gentlemen. The discrimination is happening now. This attitude, this set of attitudes and ways of behaving that support the belief that biological males should be allowed to compete against biological females in sports in spite of physiological advantages, and that men should be allowed to invade the bathrooms and private spaces of biological females, thereby erasing their rights and opportunities. That's the discrimination that's happening right now. So of course, Democrats on this committee don't want to talk about the actual bill, because Democrats who once championed women's rights are now participating in erasing them. So it's time for truth. We talk about all these rights, but what about the rights of Peyton McNabb, who was a 17-year-old North Carolina high school volleyball player with dreams of being a college athlete? Her dreams were shattered in 2022 by a 5'11" transgender opponent who spiked the ball with such force that when it struck her in the face, it knocked her unconscious. When she woke up, she was diagnosed with permanent brain damage and has difficulty walking without falling. Payton later stated, and I quote, "If only my rights had been more important than a man's feelings," unquote. So no wonder Democrats don't want to talk about this bill. Let's talk about Tennessee native Riley Gaines, who was recognized as one of the top female swimmers in the country, competing at the University of Kentucky swim team. She was forced to compete against transgender swimmer Leah Thomas, a 6'1" male who performed miserably against other males before choosing to identify as female. Riley described the humiliation and abandonment she and other female swimmers felt when they were forced to shower with this fully intact male only a few inches away from them. Riley was denied the trophy she had worked her entire life to win by a biological male competing as a female. Shattered dreams. So, of course, Democrats on this committee don't want to talk about what's actually in the bill. Iowa's very own Ainsley Erzin, a high school track star from Carlisle, who has been an outspoken critic of transgender girls competing against real girls, had this reality check in the Des Moines Register editorial. She said, quote, "My time of 2:06:52, the time that made me the fastest Iowa high school female 800 runner of all time, the time that earned me the title of national champion, was easily beat by 85 high school boys at the 2021 Iowa high school track meet alone. 85, just in our small town of Iowa," unquote. Her rights matter too. I was personally made aware of a female student at a Des Moines Community College culinary arts program who was shocked to find a much older male in her restrooms and changing facilities. When she spoke to the college, she was told that she was the problem. And since this transgender individual was a protected class, she had no recourse. Her feelings, her security, her safety didn't matter. She left the college dispirited that her rights as a woman did not matter. So, of course, Democrats don't want to talk about what is specifically in this bill. In response to these realities and other similar incidents in Iowa, and the belief that the rights of women were being assaulted in Iowa, Iowa Republicans passed legislation that mandated that participation in school sports be based on biology at birth. And we passed other legislation to protect sports and private facilities. A few years ago, Iowa Republicans found out that taxpayers were footing the bill for sex change operations and hormone therapies for individuals on Medicaid and in our prisons, and we passed legislation to stop it. In 2019, the Supreme Court struck it down in a case called Good versus the Iowa Department of Human Services, citing the fact that gender identity is a protected class in Iowa code. From 2015 to 2022, Iowa taxpayers, by my calculation, based on information provided by the Department of Health and Human Services, has paid for sex change procedures to the tune of $1,950,613. Not acceptable. Gender identity was placed in the Iowa Civil Rights Code as a protected class in 2007 when Democrats had complete control of Iowa government. The problem with protected classes in this particular case is that it elevates rights above other citizens, even though all citizens are supposed to be afforded equal protection under the law. In the case of gender identity, the impact of this elevation of rights above the rights of others I have just talked about. The removal of gender identity as a protected class means that transgender rights are not elevated above women and other citizens. Transgender rights will continue to be protected, just as are the rights of all Americans by the U.S. Constitution, the Bill of Rights, federal law, the Iowa Constitution, and Iowa law. Additionally, as a result of the U.S. Supreme Court Bostock decision, transgender individuals are protected from housing and employment discrimination. Every Iowan deserves to have their human rights protected and to be treated with dignity and respect. Current Iowa code with gender identity as a protected class actually results in the infringement of the rights of many Iowans for the reasons I have already articulated. 28 states do not have gender identity in their civil rights code, and neither does the federal government, further exposing the lack of truth in claims this will result in discrimination. And 3 of those states that don't have it in their code, have the top transgender populations in the country, Texas, Florida, and North Carolina. To place the rights of women and all Iowans on equal footing and to safeguard the laws we have passed to protect women's sports and private spaces and our children from irreversible sex change operations, this legislation is essential. Mr. Chair, I move House Study Bill 242.
Representative Holt moves House Study Bill 242 as amended. The clerk call the roll.
Representative Holt,
Aye.
Representative Lawler, Representative James,
No.
Representative Crokin, Representative Dunwell,
Aye.
Representative Fett,
Aye.
Representative Gustoff, Representative Losi, Representative Meyer, Representative Nordman, Representative Olson, Representative Shipley, Representative Srinivas, Representative Stone, Representative M. Thompson,
Aye.
Representative C. Thompson, Representative Wessel Crochelle, Representative Wheeler,
Aye.
Representative Wilburn,
No.
Representative Williams, Representative Wills.
With a vote of 13 in favor and 8 against, the bill moved to the floor as a committee bill. I will now turn the chair back over to Representative Holt.
Thank you. Is there any further business coming before the committee? Seeing none, Representative Stone moves the rise. Have a great day, everyone.